For over 50 years, Jim Wallis has been an inspirational Christian leader, living amongst the most impoverished communities in Washington, D.C., as well as calling for the abolition of nuclear weapons. Jim Wallis was born in 1948 to a white middle-class suburb of Detroit. He grew up in the Plymouth Brethren. As a teenager, he questioned the radical segregation in his church and community. He spent his student years involved in the civil rights and anti-Vietnam War movements at Michigan State University. In 1971, he attended Trinity Evangelical Divinity School in Illinois, and on graduation, he moved to Washington, D.C., and by 1975, he'd founded the Sojourner community, which published a magazine of the same name. Jim's first book was published in 1976, Agenda for Biblical People, in which he asserted that Christ's life, death, and resurrection have brought victory over the powers. In 1981, his groundbreaking book, The Call to Conversion, was published. Allow me to quote a few sentences which made a huge impression on me all those years ago. My context is an inner city neighbourhood in Washington, D.C., where a third of the people are out of work, where the poor are losing even their substandard housing, where kids graduate from high school unable to read, where girls bear children when they themselves are still children. It's an environment filled with alcohol, drugs, and violence, born of the pervasive belief, especially amongst the young, that they have no future in this society. Finally, my context is the capital city of the richest nation on earth, a city where money and power matter the most and where the poor don't matter at all. Every day, in quiet, carpeted offices, well-dressed officials and bureaucrats with clean consciences make the many necessary plans for nuclear war. Jim, the author, continued his writing in 1982, Waging Peace, a handbook for the struggle to abolish nuclear weapons. In 1983 came The New Radical. After a gap of 9 years, he wrote The Soul of Politics, a practical and prophetic vision of change. In 1995, he helped establish the Call for Renewal, which sought non-partisan political action to eradicate poverty. In 1996, he published Who Speaks for God? A New Politics of Compassion, Community and Civility. In 1997, after a 2-year courtship, Jim married Joy Carroll, one of the first women to be ordained in the Church of England. Joy was also the inspiration for the TV comedy series The Vicar of Dibley. In 2000, he published Faith Works, Lessons from the Life of an Activist Preacher. And 5 years later, God's Politics, Why the Right Gets It Wrong and the Left Doesn't Get It. In December 2005, Wallis and members of the Sojourners and Call for Renewal were arrested by Capitol Police for their protest of what they believed to be an immoral national budget. Next came Living God's Politics, a guide to putting your faith into action. In 2007, he received an honorary doctorate in humane letters from Georgetown University. In 2008, he published The Great Awakening, Reviving Faith and Politics in a Post-Religious Right America. Jim Wallis worked as a spiritual advisor to President Barack Obama and served on the advisory council to the President's Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. In 2008, Jim was speaking at a conference of clergy in Derbyshire when he said that his Christian commitment does not allow him to align with any political wing. Don't go left, don't go right, go deeper. By 2009, Jim had been arrested 22 times for acts of civil disobedience. In 2010, he published Rediscovering Values on Main Street, Wall Street, and Your Street. In 2012, Jim spoke at the World Economic Forum in Davos, although this was before the WEF announced their vision for a global technocratic society. In 2013, he published On God's Side, What Religion Forgets and Politics Hasn't Learned. In 2017, Wallis, alongside other faith leaders, including Episcopal Bishop Michael Curry, launched the Reclaiming Jesus movement, and over 5 million people watched the launch video. Jim's most recent book in 2019 was Christ in Crisis, Why We Need to Reclaim Jesus. In the 1970s, Jim had described himself as at heart a pastor, an editor, a teacher, and an evangelist. But now, 50 years later, Jim is recognized as a globally respected writer, preacher, justice advocate, regular international commentator on ethics and public life, and a mentor for a new generation.